This is Azerbaijani, Odlar, Yurdu Radio, 102.7 FM CFRO Vancouver Co-op radio station.
Vancouver şəhərinin Co-op radyosunun 102.7 FM dalğasından yayılan Odlar Yurdu radyosudur.
This is 102.7 FM CFRO Vancouver Co-op radio station. My name is Eyüp Hacıyev and I'll be delighted to be your host over the next hour. As usual, we have prepared a very interesting program for you in this beautiful day in Vancouver. Many of our listeners may already heard about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, many ethnic conflicts erupted in the region controlled by the communist regimes. Among all conflicts, one conflict, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, was the bloodiest. And the conflict resulted in death of more than 40,000 people and displacement of millions of refugees and internally displaced people. And as a result of the conflict, as a result of the full-scale war, Azerbaijan lost about 15 to 20% of its territory and gained millions of refugees. It was a complete disaster for both countries. The ceasefire agreement were signed between two countries in 1994, and since then, over the last 15 years, peace negotiations have been going on between the two countries, but yet there is no results. And over the next few years, there have been lots of discussions regarding the possibility of new war, which may be completely devastation for the both countries and for the entire region, as both Armenia and Azerbaijan have purchased significant amounts of military hardware and weapons over the last 20 years. So if the conflict erupts again, it's going to have devastating effects. Recently, European Parliament adopted a resolution on negotiations of association agreement with Azerbaijan and Armenia. The resolution contains a number of recommendations for both countries, which may affect the peace settlement of the conflict. And yesterday, I spoke with Emin Milli, a prominent Azerbaijani blogger and activist who have played a key role in advocating for the adoption of these resolutions. We talked about these new resolutions. He explained the meaning, and also we spoke regarding what implications this new resolution have for the peace negotiation process. So because the time differences, I had to pre-record the interview, but we can play it right now, and if you have questions, you can call to our studio after. So let's listen together. I just want to thank you for agreeing to participate in this interview.
I want to thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so I mean, tell me about your background to our listeners, so just small introduction.
Well, right now I'm a student at SOAS. I'm studying here. I'm doing Master State Society and Development. Mm-hmm. Before I came here, I was a blogger, an activist in Azerbaijan, and I was jailed for things I have written and done. I was jailed I spent in jail about more than 16 months. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was actively organizing Azerbaijani, young generation of Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijan, in Europe, and was organizing different sort of public spaces where new generation could come and network and basically get together for different initiatives. And before that, I was working in international NGO scene in Azerbaijan. I was a coordinator in International Republican Institute, and I was a director of Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Azerbaijan. Friedrich Ebert Foundation was one of the biggest German political foundations, and I was first coordinator of this foundation in Azerbaijan.
Nice. The way that we know you, a blogger and activist. So, but we're going to talk about something else, about the European Parliament new resolution passed by European Parliament on negotiations on the European Union Association agreements with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Can you tell to our listeners a little bit about background about this?
Well, I think that many of you, at least some of you, know about the problem we have with our neighbor Armenia, and Armenia occupied Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding territories, which are all recognized part of Azerbaijan, international recognized territories. Now, for some time since collapse of the Soviet Union, there have been war, and since 1994 we have a ceasefire, and there have been made various efforts, on international level to bring peace to the region, but all these have failed so far. And unfortunately, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, we have authoritarian systems in power, authoritarian governments, and both governments are trying to manipulate this conflict also to keep themselves in power. Both governments are supporting a militant form of nationalism propagated on state level, in schools, in universities, in everyday life, through media, and it helps both Sarkisyan and Ilham Aliyev to stay in power, but unfortunately it doesn't help both nations to develop agenda of peace and freedom. So what happened recently in European Parliament, I think is very important, because European Parliament adopted two resolutions recommending basically European Commission and Council of European Union and European External Action Service basically to take these points into consideration when negotiating association agreements with Azerbaijan and Armenia. And there were several points which were very new, and I think they will bring new dynamic into negotiation on this conflict, and especially the fact that the European Parliament suggests or demands to make Armenians withdrawal from occupied Azerbaijani territories conditional. So it puts the conditionality, on negotiations, and demands from Armenia withdrawal from occupied territories around Nagorno-Karabakh at first stage. And I think it's a very, very good development, because European Parliament has never been so concrete, or European Union, for that matter, or international community. In a way, they were not so concrete, and there was not so much leverage, to pull negotiations.
So let me try to paraphrase what you say for our listeners. So the Azerbaijan and Armenia have been in conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh region since early 1990s, and by the 1994, Armenia occupied about 15% of Azerbaijani territory, which is Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding regions. and there's been peace negotiation going on between countries, but the governments have been using this the conflict to maintain the power in both countries. But recently, European Union made a step forward, putting concrete conditions in front of each country to take those conditions as part of the negotiation between European Union and those countries. Is it correct?
Basically, yes. It was. I would call it even a roadmap, because in a way, it is not just about conflict itself. It also puts a number of basically conditions in front of Azerbaijani and Armenian governments on issues of human rights, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and makes it also conditional that actually the agreement can be suspended if Azerbaijan and Armenia do not meet benchmarks concerning the human rights and freedom of expression and implementation of judgments of the European Court on Human Rights. So it is exactly another very important, just to continue my thought, another important dimension of these resolutions was also to bind together the progress in peace negotiation, let's say on Armenia and Azerbaijan concerning the conflict, but it's very important, the progress on human rights, on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, issues which are equally, which European Union is equally critical about, both in the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And it is very actually amusing that, in Armenia you have, this talk about double standards, and in Azerbaijan you have talks about double standards, in Europe, accusing basically European actors, in double standards. But this is a very good development. It makes clear that the resolution of the conflict doesn't depend just, it cannot be seen separately from progress, in political system and in basically the framework of human rights. Because without developing human rights standards in both countries, it will be hard to talk about, giving guarantees of, guarantees for people who are living in Armenia and Azerbaijan, because refugees and IDPs, they will return, both through Armenia and Azerbaijan. There will be a process, because, Armenians also left Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijanis left Armenia. They left also Nagorno-Karabakh. They left the surrounding territories. So all this process should be, seen. We should look at the big picture, not the small picture and pieces which governments were trying to present us now for some time. And I think another interesting development here was that basically it was really, in a way, also initiative of. I don't know about Armenian civic network, but I can talk about on behalf of Azerbaijan civic network. I know there have been people involved in basically advocating this freedom and peace approach being integrated in these resolutions and in EU policies. And this makes a very interesting case, because Azerbaijani government tried after these resolutions to claim some credit for, as they call it, a diplomatic success, but it sounds very strange, because basically in those two resolutions there was not just conditions put on Armenia to withdraw from occupied territories, but also a lot of criticism and conditions on Azerbaijani government basically demanding it, and Armenian government demanding both governments to respect human rights.
Yeah, going back to the conditions for withdrawal of the troops. Can you talk about that? Or why does is it like favoring Azerbaijan some way? Is it demanding the troops withdrawal so the Azerbaijani refugees can return back? So what are the concrete conditions towards the settlement of the conflict beyond the human rights, like about the withdrawal?
The fact is that these are internationally recognized Azerbaijani territories. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody questions it, and of course, there is this contradiction between principle of, in a way, I don't think there is contradiction, but some, and especially, in Armenia, the Armenian government tries to present it as contradiction. There is between these two principles of, territorial integrity and self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a very, very broad discussions and debates in European Parliament. There were different opinions, on what sort of policies should be adopted in the framework of these resolutions. And the compromise was that it was adopted, but it was adopted. The phrasing is that the Armenians should withdraw from Karabakh, and surrounding occupied territories.
Mm-hmm.
Some people then ask, what is Nagorno-Karabakh not occupied, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point here is that it was really hard to push this phrase in European Parliament, because there were also MPs, lobbied by Armenian government, who were trying basically even not to let this happen. So the compromise was to adopt this phrase, and but this should not be seen. I don't see it as a problem, because including Nagorno-Karabakh, all the occupied territories are recognized as, internationally as part of Azerbaijan. Nobody questions this.
Yeah.
So for the first stage in this negotiation, and this is what Azerbaijani government was also, trying to push so far unsuccessfully, because of, lacking credibility of Azerbaijani government on an international level. But Azerbaijani civic network, we and I personally tried to explain some MPs in European Parliament how important is, to put some sort of, conditions to demand from Armenian troops withdrawal. Mm-hmm. So if we have achieved the withdrawal of, surrounding territories, which now make the majority of occupied territories, even, so if that happens on the first stage, if refugees go back home, what is demanded in the resolution, of course it will create a much better conditions for us to take the confidence building measures, to take basically peace negotiations, much more ahead. And for me, a military solution is not a solution, because any military solution will basically destroy, basically, in my opinion, the statehood of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. Today we have problems in state building, in building the rule of law, democracy, economies of our countries, because we have this conflict, because it gives a possibility to some neighboring countries to intervene in our basically policies in our everyday life. So, and I think this is very important. The issues I just try to highlight.
Okay, let me try to paraphrase a little bit for our listeners. So what you're saying is that there is concrete conditions for Armenian withdrawal from the Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding regions in this resolution, and that's the conditions were put by the advocacy efforts by you and other people who worked on the resolution and or advocated for this. And this condition is because once Armenia withdraws from those troops from the occupied territories, there is going to be much better situation for peace building, situation for negotiations between two countries. Now, that's right. Yeah, was I kind of paraphrasing, summarizing right?
Yes, but European Parliament is vague on Nagorno-Karabakh.
Okay.
It is emphasizing it is making clear the need for Armenia to withdraw its troops from surrounding territories. But it's vague on Nagorno-Karabakh.
Oh, I see.
Which I think is just a product of a compromise, because again there was a lot of pressure in European Parliament from MPs who were supporting the agenda of Armenian government, and in my opinion, it is basically still very good progress, I think, both for me as representative of Azerbaijani civil society, but also for everyone who supports, peace agenda, because it gives an opportunity to move forward,
Yeah.
We cannot sit and demand like a 100% sort of a wording which will satisfy just our desires. On the other hand, if you take into consideration that all members of European Union accept territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, if you put it in a bigger context, I still think it's a victory for peace agenda and for people who hope for real progress in this peace negotiation.
Okay, my next question. So, what are the chances that this is going to happen over the next, I don't know how many years? What are the chances that these conditions put by the European Union will convince Armenia to withdraw at least from one occupied region? I'm not talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh. I'm not talking about all the 7 other districts that have been occupied. I'm just telling one. So what are the chances?
I think chances are very low. I'm not claiming, and I think it would be very naive to say that these resolutions would, solve the conflict. The conflict is solved in Armenia and in Azerbaijan. It demands courage of representatives of civil society in both countries to stand up for peace, to push for peaceful solutions. And in my opinion, it is very much connected to economic and political and social development in Armenia and in Azerbaijan. I don't think that the way how things are running now in Armenia or in Azerbaijan, we are actually getting closer to peace, unfortunately. These are authoritarian countries. Both countries are authoritarians. In Armenia, when people demonstrate, Armenian government kills people on the streets. In Azerbaijan, there are political prisoners. There is no freedom of assembly, or it is very restricted. They don't let opposition to gather. They arrest people for being active on Facebook or being a civil activist. There are currently 7 journalists in jail in Azerbaijan. So these are not conditions where I think we can hope for really, a peaceful or for some progress in negotiations, because in my opinion, this resolution of conflict is very much dependent on economic and political development in both countries.
Okay.
So what I think is important, we need economic development, not just oil sector driven development. We need a genuine economic development, and now I'm talking about Azerbaijan. We need, because it will give rise to the development of a new social forces in Azerbaijan, which is, I think, very necessary. It will give rise to birth of leaders of new generation, which will not look at this conflict as a way to profit and to stay in power, or just to manipulate its own fellow citizens in order to gain some political scores, but would really create a different, it would help this development, in my opinion, to create a new mindset which will help us to move this peace process forward. And it will create new social economic conditions, let's say, for us in Azerbaijan, to offer Armenians a better conditions in integrating them in our society. And we need people with these visions, we need organizations with these visions, we need citizens with these visions, okay? It's not just about, taking back our territories, but it's also about providing better living conditions for, every citizen of Azerbaijan, including Armenia.
So I'm going to try to summarize what you said in 2 sentences. You're saying that these resolutions are a very important step towards peace building process, but this is not going to lead immediate peace, because that immediate peace depends on many other conditions, many other situations, especially the civil development of the civil society and economic development in both countries, and democracy, of course. When that happens, there's going to be better conditions for peace negotiations. Was it a good summary?
Yeah, in a way, yes, of course, but I do not want, again, underestimate also the fact that these resolutions have been adopted, because it gives a new dynamic, and it makes European Parliament, I think, in my opinion, for the first time, takes much more clear stand on the issue of resolution of these conflicts, and brings in the conditionality principle into this negotiations. So it basically gives opportunity to both, not just governments of Armenia, of Azerbaijan, but also to societies, which is for me much more important, of Armenia and Azerbaijan, to develop a vision about integration of both countries to European structures, to European Union. And makes clear what is demanded from both societies in order, to get this integration, several steps further.
Okay, my next question, would accepting similar resolution by the parliaments of other countries, let's say, for example, Canada, where I live, will help the negotiation process, peace negotiation process? And let's say, would it help if more and more developed countries will demand both countries to withdraw from the occupied territories and start the peace negotiation process? Would it help? Do you think?
Yes, I think it will help, but it is very important. But, another interesting thing about this resolution was that it was, initiative, and it worked as there was a certain alliance between civic democratic global network of Azerbaijanis. This was not basically initiated by Azerbaijani or Armenian government, because obviously there are points which are very contradictory for what both Armenian and Azerbaijani governments stand for right now. So, and I think this is exactly the way how it can be done in Canada. Civic activists, those, and it could be, citizens of Canada, of Azerbaijan origin, or, of not Azerbaijan origin, who could push their MPs to adopt resolutions, basically supporting this initiative of European Parliament, this, bringing conditionality on, negotiating of, association agreement with Armenia and Azerbaijan, and demanding withdrawal of Armenian troops from occupied territories, and demanding both from Azerbaijan and Armenia respect for human rights. So in my opinion, this should be a civic initiative, okay? Azerbaijani government failed for last basically 20 years to move this process, as well as Armenian government failed, because these governments are, I think, interested more in issue of keeping themselves in power rather than genuinely contributing to the resolution of this conflict. And I think it's civil society, and in my opinion, another interesting development both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, that in the last 20 years we had a huge. There was development, I think, of a new generation of diaspora of both Armenian and Azerbaijani diaspora abroad. And I think the constructive forces in these both diasporas, those who genuinely dream about peace and development in both countries, they should push their own in their respective parliaments around the world, that if those parliaments, let's say Canadian Parliament, would adopt resolution basically referring to these resolutions of European Parliament and just reiterating its support, for pushing the same policies and demanding both governments of Azerbaijan and Armenia, to push for peace and freedom in both countries. I think this would be fantastic if we would have a, avalanche of basically resolutions around the world appealing to governments of Azerbaijan and Armenia to push for peace and freedom in both countries.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna try to paraphrase one more time your last few sentences, that you're saying that it will be important if more countries, the countries like Canada and other countries, reiterate their support of this resolution and adopt similar resolution demanding the two governments to come together and facilitate the freedom and peace negotiations. But you think that it needs to be done by civil society organizations? It needs to be done diaspora who's actually interested in this?
Absolutely. I think that both governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan failed so far to bring some meaningful, change in these peaceful negotiations. And I think that civil society in Armenia and Azerbaijan and global civil society, especially people, who have ties with Armenia and Azerbaijan, should push for this, peace and freedom agenda in their own parliaments. And I think it can really make a difference. The same way, the Azerbaijan Democratic Association in Britain here just pushed the early day motion. It's a sort of, you can say, a document in British Parliament, which was signed by several members of British Parliament, demanding basically the same thing, withdrawal of Armenian troops from occupied territories, the respect and following for UN Security Council resolutions. So it is possible. It has been done by civic network in Britain. It has been done now on European level. I think we should do it in other European countries, but also, in US Congress, in Canada. We should break this monopoly of advocacy work, which is done basically, by pro-governmental organizations, and it's not working. We should understand. I mean, everyone who is concerned with the future of Armenia and Azerbaijan, peace and freedom in the region of South Caucasus, should understand that this is possible. Do not let this job to be done by governments, because they are failing doing their jobs. The civic networks, global civic networks of Democrats, of peace activists, freedom activists, who can do these things, because we do have allies in all those parliaments who share our values. But Azerbaijan and Armenian government do not have those allies. They just try to buy some politicians with money to push their own narrow agendas, but it's not working. And what civic networks can do is amazing. And I call on everyone to make an effort and go to their, representatives in the parliaments and ask them to help and to do the same things what happened in European Parliament and in British Parliament.
All right, that was my last question. Anything to add?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And thank you very much for deciding to speak to us at 7 a.m. in London. Waking up early for the interview.
This is Azerbaijani Odlar Yurdu Radio 102.7 FM CFRO Vancouver Co-op Radio Station.